pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases like the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. Don't be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then in this way: Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. This is the word of the Lord. There are like 2 Anglicans in the room. So I'm just going to start with a story. Like most small villages on the outskirts of a major UK city, the village of Cogsworth had a little parish church. Now, Cogsworth isn't real, I've made it up. This little parish church did a lot that was a credit to its small 25-strong congregation. Its regular coffee mornings were a joyous occasion to all involved, as were the choir concerts and bake sales that they contributed to the village family fund days. Their daring fundraising back in 2011, in which the vicar had abseiled down the church's tower dressed in a Superman costume, was one of their defining moments, and it caused such a stir that it ended up in the local newspaper. Nobody, however, could have expected that there would be so radical a display of Christian faith going on beneath it all. See, every Sunday, whether in his sermon or as an excuse for leaving so hastily and skipping out on the post-service tea and coffee, the vicar of the church would tell the congregation that he was leaving to go straight into the city and help to lead a free lunch and communion service for the homeless. This, he explained, was something he felt compelled to do, even though it fell squarely outside the parameters of his usual parish activity. Of course, the congregation weren't to know that the vicar in fact went home to catch up on the television he had missed because of his evening meetings during the week. Only there was a member of his congregation who was inspired by the vicar's activity in the city. And some months ago, she decided that she would take part in the service for the homeless. But to her dismay, she couldn't figure out who was running it, where it was, and the vicar seemed not to receive her emails. Eventually, however, she wised up to the vicar's deception. Unusually, her response was not to out the vicar for what he'd done, but instead to set up the service that he claimed to be running without telling people about it. The homeless were grateful for the service and that they were welcomed into each Sunday, and many of them began to find places to stay off the streets. The problem was, they were unsure who to say had given them this hope. The Christians were keen to say that they provided such a service, but on observation they couldn't identify any of the local church leaders there. And frustratingly, the people who actually ran it held no hard feelings against the Christians for claiming their work as their own, but they refused to say where they'd come from or why they were doing what they were doing. Now, I hope that story shocks you as much as I intended it to. And if it did, then I hope that the reading from Matthew's Gospel does the same. The church recite the Lord's Prayer together every week, and we're going to do that later on in the service. But we often do this as though it were enough to just speak the words communally. But Jesus' ministry seems to never be adequately represented if it's just left at the level of lip service. And the positioning of this passage in Matthew's Gospel is extremely important. And if we're to understand the full force of what Jesus is instructing here, we need to take it into context. We may have heard in the past that what Jesus is doing is giving his disciples a template for prayer scripture, and that's one that's worked into the advised format for intercessory prayer in many denominations across the world. And if we were reading Luke's account of the story, that would definitely be true. But in Matthew's telling, there's a much more challenging dynamic at play. What we find in Matthew's Gospel is Jesus delivering this teaching in the context of several other stories. The first story is Jesus instructs his disciples to give alms to the temple without drawing attention to what they are doing. That's alms as in A-L-M-S, not alms as in, people's body parts. And this is the way that others are going about practice. They're going about and they're giving money and they're saying, look how much money I'm putting into the temple fund, But Jesus says this is just performance piety. Instead, it's better not even to let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. The second story is that Jesus instructs his disciples to put oil on their heads and wash their faces when fasting, so that it isn't obvious to other people what they're doing. And that's in contrast to the hypocrites, who make their fasting visible by making a dramatic show of their hunger. Jesus, thirdly and finally, instructs his disciples to store up treasures in heaven rather than being intent with gathering up worldly riches. Now you might ask, why is any of that significant when we're talking about prayer? Well, for a start, the instruction on prayer is sandwiched in the middle of all of those other teachings, which not only screams out to some sort of commonality between them, but it also tells us two particular things. First, this isn't about the theology of prayer or an affirmation of a particular word format. Instead, this is about an attitude to prayer that should transform what we do internally. And the second point to make is that this instruction is about what we do externally. The answer to this prayer isn't to sit back and wait for God to, in some supernatural display, swoop down from heaven and answer all of our requests, but instead, for us to take up the task of driving those requests into action. Let me explain what I mean. Immediately after outlining what we've come to know as the Lord's Prayer, Jesus gives this instruction. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. So we should expect that that same logic is inherent in the remainder of prayer. So, if you feed others, then you too will be fed. If you rescue others from evil, you too will be rescued. If you bring the kingdom to the world, then the kingdom will be brought to you. What this instruction means to us is that if we want to be set apart, then it isn't going to be by doing things that make a big display of our beliefs, but it's about what we do with requiring payback from people, without requiring payback from people, that will allow us to see the action of God. Like the lady in the story earlier, if we do what we know to be the work of the kingdom, then we'll see good start to come. And if we do this out of love, and not out of a need for recognition, then we'll see that it's God's work after all. And perhaps this is why no amount of clever rhetoric, no amount of academic protest to science, no amount of violent debate with Christian atheists will ever be able to amount in value to actually letting all of those things go in favour of acting as Christ would to others. So this means, among a host of other things, not allowing our success to be defined by conversion statistics or our particular views on theological matters, or on which denomination we belong to, or on whether we understand something right when others get it wrong, but on whether what we do makes the world look like a more united, loving whole. And beyond that, Jesus' instruction on prayer is a challenge to do all of this stuff without worrying about people noticing we're doing it at all. So as we consider the charge of thy kingdom come, their encouragements to the church to be praying this phrase in unity, let's follow the instruction as Christ intended, by becoming the nameless embodiment of the kingdom of God.